בסייעתא דשמיא, מסכת Bava Metzia, page 34, we'll start on page 33b. The Mishnah, the beginning of the chapter Hamafkid, the chapter dealing with Dinei Shomrim, the law of guardians. In the text, our Torah speaks about 4 different avenues when it's come to someone who is a shomer, who is a guardian. First, someone who's doing it with no charge, shomer chinam. Second, someone who gets paid for guarding an item, shomer sachar. Third one, it's someone who's either renting, leasing, and again it's involved with payment. And the fourth one is shoel, is just a borrower. Here are several scenarios because there are so many, and soon you see how practical is those important Mishnah and Gemara and Halachot. Trace a situation, it happens, someone was standing in New York to New York flight from Ben Gurion airport. So that fellow was standing at the airport and all of a sudden another fellow was walking with a little son, and his little son needs help going to the bathroom. So he asked the first one to watch over his suitcase. Now, unfortunately, while he was watching and the other fellow took his son to the bathroom, they called for his flight to New York. So unfortunately, he rushed and left unattended that suitcase. Guess what happened? The guardian gets there, he called the robots, and the robots came in and they bombed that suitcase. So he take him to rabbinic court, to the Beit Din, saying that he caused him loss of a lot of valuable things in that suitcase. It can be a different scenario that a thief can walk in and pick up that unattended suitcase and take it. The question is, what the first fellow said to him, watch over this suitcase, what does that mean? Does that mean that the fellow who acquiesce or consent is automatically gives him some either responsibilities or privileges? The Rambam, he have a very strong view on that, and he brings a very precise and lucid view. He said, you need to have a clear statement, a clear declaration of testimony from both parties. Meaning, the fellow that asked to guard needs to say, I agree upon to be your guardian for this suitcase. The other fellow that said that asked him to do it, he also needs to agree to give him the right over that suitcase. Meaning, as long as either one of the parties not say, Ani shomer shelcha, I am guardian for you, or tiyeh shomer sheli, you become my guardian. Without this, you don't have any basis for claim. Can go on to see the severity of those upcoming cases. Let's say, use the name Reuven and Shimon. Reuven asked Shimon, I saw you have a safe, and in the safe you put some cash. Let's say they're walking and some law offices or counting that they carry a big safe. So Reuven said to Shimon, who owns that safe, here I have, let's say, $10,000. Can I use your safe to put that money? And Shimon said, fine. Shimon, while he was in a rush the other day, he took his assets and he left the safe unattended. And guess what? The 10,000 of Reuven disappeared. So he asked the same question. Do you have the obligation, if you go by the Rambam, one party can say, לא התחייבתי בשמירה. I did not commit myself to guard your item. So, therefore, we are not partner in that save. So, the basic requirements based on our upcoming study of Mishnah and Gemara and Rambam and more, bli kinyanei shmira, without making a total transactions between parties, you cannot have any tokef, any umdana mukhletet, any a serious rabbinic court decision of imposing on one party payment. Furthermore, the whole idea of shomer chinam, meaning, as we said, based on Exodus 22, someone who's guard estate of someone else without getting paid, it's called shomer chinam. The only time you impose on him payment is a pshia, if it was a deliberation of some level of crime or some level of severe negligence. What exactly a person needs to do in order to be exempt from that, if he is the one who's unpaid guardian? In general, we're going to see three different avenues, which call the declaration of oath. Either a person said, Shvu'ah shelo pashati, I make an oath that I didn't do anything intentionally, deliberately of negligence, or shelo shalachti bayad, that I didn't steal anything from that estate, or shelo birshuti, it's not under my domain. The Khatam Sofer, the great rabbi in the past generation in Hungary, explained to us that in many cases, and you see it also in the Gemara, there are people who prefer to pay and not to make those oaths. It's very serious in the mindset of Jewish law for people to come out and express a word of oath. So the question is, what do you do next? If the guardian did not take an oath, so he needs to pay. So it was a stolen item, let's say, and the guardian agreed to pay because he doesn't want to take an oath. So therefore, he automatically kana zchut lekabel kefel bachefetz. If they discover the thief, and by Torah law the thief needs to pay double, automatically the one who make this type of payment without taking oath, he now acquired the right to get a double payment from the thief. So, hypothetically speaking, obviously, but trace a situation with someone who's guarding something that's worth $10,000. He knew that he had nothing to do with the stolen of that item, but he didn't want to make a vow. So he paid out of pocket 10K. Guess what happened? A week later, the thief came out and paid, but by the Torah law he needs to pay double. So the double, which is 20K, the one who basically paid upfront the 10,000 because he chooses not to take an oath, he gained double from the thief, kana zchut. If it's an animal, base again, you read in Exodus 22, the animal, it's imposing sometimes 4 or even 5 times payment. If a person slaughter the animal, sell the meat, etc., etc. So, therefore, we're going to have in a Gemara, in the upcoming Talmud section, a discussion, how a person who's willing, he's a guardian, and he doesn't want to take an oath. In exchange, he paid the value of that animal. And it turns out that they discovered the events, and now the Bet Din imposed payment of 4 or 5 times. It's basically transfer not to the owner, but to the unpaid, for example, guardian. The argument is davar shelo ba la'olam. It's not happened yet, and yet we say that it's some type of acquisition, a commitment. As we said earlier, there are many discussions and many avenues based on this Mishnah and this Perek. Let's say a rental of car. Reuven asked Shimon to rent his own second car. He needs it for a couple of weeks. And let's say he owed him for that rental $500, but he was involved with some accident and the car is totally lost. But because the car is old and the appraisal value was not worth it to go to all the fixing of the car, so he basically gets to pay for the car value, which is, let's say, the fixing the car is like $6,000 and the car value is like $4,000. So Reuven agreed upon paying Shimon the $4,000. Shimon come to Bedin and said, wait a second, he rented the car for me and he owed me another $500 for the rental time. So soon you see, based on the Mishnah, he can impose on him that payment. The big question is how you treated those particular lines in the Shmot 22, Exodus chapter 22, such as Be'alav imo, the honors with him. Even a simple case, a fellow called for a special event in his beautiful office or home, and neighbors and friends came in, and he borrowed chair, expensive chair from other neighbor. And all of a sudden the guest ruined those chairs. Question is, are you call it as meta mechamat melacha, as you call it shoel chayav be'onsin, the borrower is obligated even in a case that is above his control? What is exactly be'alav imo, and much more. So as you see, there is a very big open subjects. Best books that I find in this is obviously Netivot HaMishpat and Chatam Sofer and many more that discuss these different avenues of understanding the law of guardians. Let's zoom in our Mishnah again, page 33b. המפקיד אצל חברו בהמה או כלים. Here the Mishnah starts with the case that a fellow deposits by his fellow, let's say Reuven, gives to Shimon either animal or vessels. Tosfot here challenged the next line, which is Venignevu o she'avdu. What does that mean? Or stolen? If stolen or lost. Stolen, we understand that is double portion, but what double portion of payment applies to lost? Tosfot try to explain it, and the Gemara later expand on the whole idea of animal or vessels. And the situation is, as we mentioned earlier, velo atzali shava. The guardian is unpaid guardian, and he feels, I don't want to go to that notion of making an oath that I didn't steal or I didn't do anything deliberately. So therefore, because the sages tells us, Shomer chinam nishba v'yotze. So here it's important to know the difference between Ramban and Rashba, two separate mindsets. Ramban said that if a person can make an oath, and by making oath, what exactly transpired? He is basically saying, I'm making oath, I wasn't involved by any means of stealing or doing anything, and therefore I'm free. But all of a sudden, there are some witnesses that came out and say that he was really negligent, so therefore he will not gain the kefir, the double payment. Rashba tells us that regardless, he gets double payment if he is in a situation that he decided to go ahead and basically come out, and שערי אמרו, you see this attitude, in Hebrew you call it טוב ציפור ביד מציפור על העץ. It's better to have I think it's many other languages. It's better to have a bird in your hand rather than to have two birds on a tree. So he figured out that that's the best way to get it. The Pnei Yoshua tried to say that it's me'ein takanat chachamim, that it's some resonance of insinuation of rabbinic decree. But anyway, they said here, Sha'arei Amu, because the sages said that if that deposit was lost or stolen, unpaid guardian, he's taken oath and he is free. Yet, נמצא הגנב משלם תשלומי כפל. If they discover the one who stole it, so he needs to pay double, as the Torah mentioned, and tavach umachar, if the Torah said if there is a situation that one, the thief, he slaughtered or sold it, he pays the fourfold or fifthfold payment. משלם תשלומי 4 ו5. The question is, למי משלם? To whom the thief needs to pay? The answer is, למי שהפיקדון אצלו, to the guardian who held that deposit. So it's a machloket rishonim, is a disputation among the early sages. What do you do if modeh ve'omer pashati, if the guardian said, I was involved in negligence? Is that making kanai takefel or lo? If he acquired by saying that the double portion or not? But anyway, nishba velo ratza leshalem. If in the case of a belly who took an oath and did not wish to pay, and now nimtza haganav, and all of a sudden the thief was found and required to pay a double payment, meshalem teshlumei kefel. So he paid double portion. Tavach umachar meshalem teshlumei 4 ו5. Same matter, that if he slaughtered or sold the animal, he requires to pay fourfold and fifthfold payment. Lemi meshalem, to whom he paid, leba'al hapikadon, the owner of the deposit, not the Beili. So the Maharsha explained, if it's a shvu'ah she'ina birshuto, if it's an oath that it's not in his domain, so vadai, for sure he needs to take an oath, because there are all kind of possibilities. We always a little suspicious. Maybe it was lo tachmod, maybe he has some idea of covered. But anyway, the Bailey in the first case, the Shomer, the guardian, gets double. The last part of the Mishnah, the owner of the deposit, he gets it. So we go back to the beginning of the Mishnah, and we are speaking about a situation that the guardian paid to the one who originally deposited the money. So now let's think together, what happened then? If he decided to pay him, and therefore he acquired all the future right of receiving the potential benefits from that situation. Why do we need to mention the first part in the Mishnah, both animal and vessel? למה לילה מתני בהמה ולמה לילה מתני כלי? Why does the Mishnah need to teach the case of one who deposits an animal? And why does the Mishnah need to teach the case of one who deposits vessel? It's enough to say one of them and we can derive the other. Tzriche, we need both. Why? The itana behema, if the Tanai and Mishnah teach us only the animal, Hava Amina, I may entertain in my mind the idea, Behemau de Maknei Leik Feila. The one who deposit give a potential to the guardian, unpaid guardian, of payment double for a special reason. You know why? Mishum din fish tircha le'ayula ule'apuka. Because it's involved with a great arduous effort that to tend the animal, to bring the animal in, to take the animal out. It's tircha meruba, it's a great effort. And therefore, since the guardian works so hard for one who deposited, therefore, intentionally the one who owns that item gives him a potential rights for any event that happens if he decided to pay instead of taking off and be free from all of that. Aval, however, kelim delon nefish tirchayu. But when it's come to case of vessel, when the great arduous effort is not required to tend the vessel, therefore, eima lo maknei leik fela. So you said, oh, since there's not so much effort involved in this, so therefore the owner does not transfer to the bailey rights to the double payment. That's the reason why we need it in both. V'itana kelim, if the Tanai and Mishnah mentioned solely vessel, hava amina, it may happen that I will think kelim hu de kamaknei leikfeila. I may think that when it's come to vessels, therefore the owner transfer right to the double payment to the bailey when the bailey pays for the lost item. Mishum delon nefish kiflayu, because the double part is not so great, because you cannot have forever more than the double portion. The only idea of fourth fold and fifth fold applies only if someone steals ox or some type of say, but and therefore we assume that the one who deposit give the right to the unpaid guardian. Aval behema dechitavach umachar. However, when it's come to the situation that the thief slaughtered and sold the animal, meshalem tashlumei arba'a v'chamisha, he pays the fourfold and fifthfold payment, which is substantial payment. Eima lo maknei leikfeila. So I will say that the owner does not transfer the right to the double payment to the belly. Tzricha. So therefore, we need both of the cases. So among the early sages, there's a discussion, what exactly the definition, maha hagdara shel haknayat kefel. What is the definition of giving a double payment? If you can say that, or hypothetically speaking, the fellow can be untruthful and to say to us that it was stolen, or maybe it's because such a great effort to go before the Beit Din. So it's a discussion. You see a lot of rabbinics writing over that. Pnei Yoshua, Ritva, Rashba, and more. Matkifla Rami Bar Chama. Rami Bar Chama have a strong objection. It is a discussion that Ritva expand of using the word matkif. But anyway, he asked, V'ha ein adam makne davar shelo ba la'olam. The person cannot transfer the ownership on an entity that has not yet come to the world. So how you tell me that the one who deposit can give the right to one who's unpaid guardian while is nothing happened yet? The thief is not yet liable, right? And the whole idea of double portion is not applied yet. because nothing happens. So, Rabbi Meir Dama, even if you go by Rabbi Meir that hold Adam makne davar shelo balaula, that yes, Rabbi Meir so hold that the person can transfer the ownership of an entity that has not yet come to the world. And in Tractate Kiddushin, page 63, there is a discussion, such as the person who starts a process of conversion can take a long time. And meanwhile, he said to some Jewish girl, you betrothed to me with a condition that I will be your future husband when I complete my conversion. But his conversion was not taking place yet. So is that in effect a statement of commitment that we can take under the consideration or not? That's part of the rabbinic discussion. Or if you have this idea of palm trees, you know, in Florida there are huge part, there's a big palm trees. So let's say a person who owns that can bring an agreement that, you see, this tree and all this produce, even it's not coming out, I already have advance commitments of sale to so and so and so. So according to the Gemara, Rav Huna said that it is an effect, and you cannot retrieve, the seller cannot retrieve its statement. So back to us, here Rav Meir hold that the person can make a transfer of ownership to an entity that it's not yet come into the world. Haneimile, those words, those statements of Rabbi Meir applies kegon peirot dekel. That apply to what? To a date palm that's not yet, you know, come out. The avidei de'atu, because we know that it will happen. And the rabbis expand on that. What does that mean? That they are, the whole idea is in general that it's very obvious and they grow on a regular basis and it happens. Versus aval hacha, in our Mishnah, we don't have any assurance that the transfer of rights to the payment is part of the initial agreement between the owner and the guardian that's taking effect when the time that he deposits. So you don't know if that tashlumei kefal, if that double portion will take place. Because, page 34, mi yeimardek mi ganva. Who will say that the deposit is going to be stolen? Rashi explained to us that this is something that it's hypothetically may happen. But since at that very second, that very moment, it didn't happen, so we don't know if it's going to be a double portion payment or not. V'im timtze lomar debiganva, and even if you say that it will be stolen, mi yemar demishtekach ganav, who told you they're going to find the one who stole and going to pay a double payment? Think about it. V'im ishtekach ganav, even with that, another doubt. Even you say, okay, it was stolen, we discover who stole the item. Who told you that the thief is going to pay double portion? Dilma modeu miftar. One of the tricks that can be played here is that the thief will confess and will be exempted from the double payment. Zoom in the Torah in Shmot 22 verse 8. The Torah said that the payment of double portion, and that's the way in Bava Kamma 64 we explain, that only if the witnesses come in and they do the whole testimony and cross-examination, etc., then you impose that payment. But in Bava Kamma, page 75, the Gemara said that if someone come and he said that, yes, I did so and so, and since originally modam mitchila, since he come and modeh, he confesses and admitted wrong, then later on the witnesses in a sense doesn't carry much. Tosfot add to that and said, even we search and discover the thief, and there are witnesses that are about to come before us and testify that it is him, but it can be a scenario that that thief appeared before us prior to those witnesses, and therefore it's off. So since all of those hypothetical scenario or a big quandary, it's a predicament if it happens and how it happens, so therefore להקנות דבר שלא בא לעולם, to make a matter of acquisition of something that is not yet happened to the world looks like impossible or something that doesn't make sense. Amar Rava explained, they try to analyze the sages, the mindset of the one who deposited, that he agree upon in advance that the unpaid barely will get a double payment. Naaseh ke'omer lo, we treat it in a sense that it's like he said to him as follows: Lich tiganev vetirtze v'tchalmeni, meaning in that case, if it will be stolen and you wish to refrain from taking an oath and you will pay me instead, ownership of my animal, of my cow, is hereby transferred to you from this time. הרי פרתי קנויה לך מעכשיו, retroactively. So therefore, because the ownership of that animal is retroactively transferred to the one who is a bailee from the time of the deposit, we fully understand that all the income, all the profits, guarantee, which is the double portion, belong to the bailee. So Netivot HaMishpat dig in this and ask question: what do you do when you have two people, let's say basic, uneducated people, that all of a sudden makes this type of situation, this scenario, and they don't know halachot, and they don't know the umdana? How we will make this analytic, logical sense of what they intend, how you make the right umdana. The whole idea of halot kinyan, to make the act of acquisition in a sense of retroactive act without big knowledge of each party, he challenged this sugya based on the situation that most of the people are not familiar with a ilchot kinyanim, of the way that the acquisition should be or take place. Anyway, the whole concept of halot kinyan you see also in Ktsot HaChoshen and many more. Matkifla Rabbi Zera. Rabbi Zera have a strong objection to that, and he said, Ihache, if you tell me that they barely retroactively purchased the animal from that moment that was transferred to him, it should be Ihache afilu gizotea uvladotea, meaning even the fleece and offspring. So the fleece and offspring, it's a discussion among the rabbis what exactly the status of that. The Rashba and Ritva say that it belongs to the belly. Others say it's belongs to the it's not acquired by him. So as the profit that originates from the body of the animal. So anyway, they discuss what exactly you do. But anyway, afilu, even the flea and offspring of the animal that grew while it was in a belly possession should be the property of the belly. Alama Tanya chutz migizoteh uvladoteh. Why then we learn in the Braita that the belly receives all profit guaranteed by the animal except for its fleece and its offsprings? אלא אמר רבי זרע נעשה כאומר לו חוץ מגזרותיה ובלדותיה. This is like the owner said to the belly, listen, the animal is thereby transferred to you from this time except for the fleece and its offspring. And that's the way the Rambam expanded in Ilchot She'ela Upikadon chapter 8. Umay Paska. So why is this halacha states in the Mishnah without qualification? Stama de Milka, usually the Gemara said, Shivcha de'ata me'alma. The profit comes for double payment from the thief, which is very difficult to anticipate. It's not part of the animal bodies. Avid inish the makne. A person is up to transfer to the belly. However, shivcha de megufa, but profit that originate from the body of the animal, which can be anticipated, it's behema shelo, it's his own animal, lo avid inish the makne. So the person is not up to transfer to the belly. So therefore, the sages say that you go by the mindset of the one who mafkid, who deposited, that he agreed to give the acquisition of double portion, that's called shevach hitzoni, external income, in order to be sure with the principle. But all the fleece and the offspring, that's not part of the deal. That's what Netivot HaMishpatis, we said, expand based on that, what exactly the definition of the umdena. Because the nature, people nature, a person can agree to give, but depends what. If it's not something that is on estate, but potential something from something that's not there, it's a well-known teshuva, it's a responsa from the son-in-law of Nodab Yehuda, whose name is Rabbi Yosef HaTzadik of Poznan. So, and that's halacha l'maaseh. A fellow had a son and a daughter, and he wrote a will, and he said, I'm giving her today 50% for my estate, which called matana michayim. So a person can say, okay, I have, let's say, $1 million, and I have a son and a daughter, so while I'm alive, I split it. Half to my son, half to my daughter. Now, the problem is, Rabbi Yosef HaTzadik of Pozna expand on that question based on our sugya. Trace a situation, come to him, and 20 years later. 20 years later, the problem is that now the person is gone, and the value of the estate is 5 million, let's say. So the question is, when he gave half to his daughter as a matana mechayim, as a gift during the lifetime, was a $500,000 for that estimate of his estate at that very time. But the future income that came after that gift during his lifetime, how you have an effective act of transaction and inquisition between parties. So that's what you hear the rabbis tell us many times. When it's come to shtarot, to write documentation that the person wants to have an effect for the future, the person must consult with the prominent posek and people who are really familiar in order to make sure that they have chalot kinyan, that the matter of acquisition is effective. Sometimes people can write a document that the Beit Din will not recognize as an effective document because it didn't have the basic requirement follow Jewish law. Ika de Amrei Amar Rabba. There are some who say that that's what Rabba said. Naaseke Omerlo, the one who deposits said when he transferred the cow, Lichti Ganev, in a case that this cow will be stolen, Vetirtzel Vetshalmeni, and you will be in a situation that you wish to refrain from taking an oath, and instead you will pay me. So the ownership of the animal is transferred. How? Samuch legnevata knuya lach. So immediately before its death, it's transferred to you. So that's Rabbi Akiva Iger and Shita Mekubetzet dealt with that. How? In one hand, you don't have the issue of davar shelo balaolam, something that not happens yet, because he gives the body of the animal who is alive and well at the time of the Maaseh Kinyan, at the time of the transactions. But the deposit of that animal versus the time that was stolen, that's basically the gray area that Rabbi Akiva Iger expanded and asked. But anyway, my benayu, what's the difference between the formulation of Rava, two different answers? So, Ika benayu kushiyah de Rabbi Zeira. The difference is the challenge with regards to Rabbi Zeira. Why? Because according to the second version, we cannot ask why the Bailey did not purchase the fleece and the offspring, because the time that he purchases only short time before it is stolen, and therefore it's clear that the fleece and the offspring belongs to the one who deposited prior to that. That's the way Rashi explained to us. It's important to note that there are several, Rabbi Akiva Iger, the Maharam Shif, and others explain that the whole halachic implication can be derived from this, because the question is when exactly the matter of acquisition happens. In the second version, that belonged to the Bailey, the fleece and the offspring, because he purchased that animal short time before it was stolen, versus the first one, also both the flea and the offspring belongs to the one deposited, because he continues with his matter of ownership by this statement that it will apply to him and not to the one who guarded. The Siftei Kohen in Choshen Mishpat 295 expand on that difference. But in Ame, the Kamma be'agam, there is another alternative explanation. The difference in the case if the animal is standing in the march at the time of the theft. Since the animal was not on the Bailey's property at that time, he could not acquire it. So you see in the Al-Shich HaKadosh, Chatam Sofer, Ktsut HaChoshen, and others, what do you do with, based on this halachot, if a person left a large amount of fund, stating there is a principal and the interest. So the principal is the principal, and the interest, he spelled out several institutions that he wants the tzedakah, the money, go. But the question is that davar shelo balaolam? Because at the time that he made those statements, it didn't happen, so he's around. And how far the acquisition or retroactive acquisition to that institution applies, because the reality is a person can change his will and can change his decisions constantly. The same applies to money that one deposits in a bank. As we know, all the funds the bank receives or other investment institutions, they use that money for whatever they need for their investments, and therefore the question is when and where and how you call that fund דבר שלא בא לעולם. Anyway, let's continue. The Mishnah Kedusha said, שילם ולא רצה להישבע. Here we have a situation. People kind of scared from taking an oath. They don't want to get involved in this. So the guardian said, what happened, all for good. I'm paying it and I don't want to take an oath. All of a sudden, the payment was received and the thief came out. So double portion goes to whom? To the belly, to the guardian. אמר רבי חייא בר אבא אמר רבי יוחנן לא שילם ממש. When we say that the guardian paid, doesn't mean that necessarily in that sense that he really transferred the fund of the value of that property to the one who deposited by him, אלא, but, כיוון שאמר הריני משלם, since the belly, the guardian stated, I'm willing to pay you, אף על פי שלא שילם, even though he did not utter, he did not physically went out and transferred that fund. So, in a sense, the belly came before the Bet Din, and he made the statement that he's willing to pay, and therefore he cannot retrieve his word, and therefore the Ramban, Rashba, and others say that the one who deposited was already definite that he had his money, the value of his estate. תנן, שילם ולא רצה להישבע, שילם אם, לא שילם לא. The language of the Mishnah doesn't sound like that. The Mishnah sounds like shilem, if he paid, the belly, the guardian paid, and he didn't want to take an oath, meaning he received the double portion if it was a thief that come out and paid double, only if he physically transferred the fund to the one who deposited. Versus if it's not, he's not received the double portion. That's opposite to what Rabbi Yochanan said. So Gemara said, Eima Seifa, go by the last clause of the Mishnah. And that's the way we understand Rabbi Yochanan's statement. Nishba, the guardian take an oath, velo rata leshalem. If he take an oath and he didn't wish to pay, so therefore he is not acquired a double portion later. Meaning, ta'amad, the reason is not received the double portion of a future payment from the thief, it's because the lo ratza, because he did not wish to pay the money, the value of that deposit. Ha ratza, but if he consent, if he agreed to pay it, therefore automatically, retroactively, he received the right over the double payment, af al pi shelo shilem, even though he did not physically transfer the fund. And that's basically follow the view of Rabbi Yochanan. And that's the way we zoom in from the last clause of the Mishnah that contradicted the first part. And therefore, consequently, the Gemara concluded, Ela meha leika lemashma mina, because the inference from the first clause and the inference from the later clause are contradictory, no inference is to be learned from this Mishnah. Tosfot here try to reconcile it, but we're running out of time, so let's continue. So now the Gemara brings a siyua, a source of strengthen the view of Rabbi Yochanan from another source. Tanya Kvatei de Rabbi Yochanan. הסוחר פרה מחברו ונגנבה. סוחר, as we learn in the Shmot Exodus 22, verse 14, socher is one who rent. Rent, in general, what we understand rent, someone who pays for taking something for rent, pays fee to use certain item. Now, it's a disputation among the sages how you treated a socher, one who pay rent. Do you treat it as a parallel of a paid belly, shomer sachar, or unpaid belly, shomer chinam? The whole idea of responsibility, it's a question, but here in the sugya they said, hasocher para mechavero v'nigneva. Reuven rent, those days they need those animals for basic work. So Reuven went to Shimon and said, I will pay you, let's use our terms, $200, and I'm going to use your cow for several hours, and all of a sudden that cow was stolen. Ve'amar hala, Reuven said to Shimon, Hareini meshalem ve'eini nishba. So here's a very sensitive issue. Reuven said to Shimon, I'm committing myself to pay, let's say, $500 for a day of using you, Shimon's cow. Shimon agreed. All of a sudden, guess what happened? That cow was stolen. Reuven, as we mentioned in the Khatam Sofer and many other sources, people afraid to take a vow at the front of rabbinic court for all kind of reasons. So Reuven said, guess what? 10 minutes after I get this cow, I turn around and it's gone. Someone stole it from me. I don't want to take a vow. I'll pay you the value of the cow. So he paid, and guess what happened later? ואחר כך נמצא הגנב. All of a sudden, the thief was found. משלם תשלומי כפל לסוחר. So now, as the Torah tells us that the thief needs to pay double, whom he needs to pay that double payment? To Reuven. Now, it's very important to us, based on the Rashi here, Rabbi Moshe and many others, the Gemara in Bava Kamma 57, practical halachot. Here is an example. Something that, as you know, I served for several years as a Tohen Rabbani in a Bet Din in Brooklyn and other places. So, one case, remember vividly, was a fellow friend from the same kollel, yeshiva institution, let's use name, Reuven, borrows Shimon's car for payment, meaning rent Shimon's car for a period of time, let's say 2 weeks. And let's give a number, $500. God forbid should never happen to anyone. Reuven lost control. The car is in a severe, not totally total loss, but in a severe damage. Obviously, it's a negligence, it's a pshi'ah. And the appraisal value of the car, let's say, was $4,500. To fix the car is like $6,000. So Reuven went ahead and he paid Shimon the $4,500. Shimon said, wait a second, you still owe me $500 for that time, let's say 10 days that you used my car. Reuven said, but I pay you the entire car's value. So the Beis Din rule based on our Gemara that obviously Reuven need to add to that 4,500 another 500 for the rental of the car, which was prior to the accident. So in our sugya, you see when a guardian, a belly, that he said, I'm ready to make the payment, he gets retroactively double payment even if he physically did not pay, and that's follow the view of Rabbi Yochanan. Now the Gemara goes to a discussion when exactly the shomer, the belly, the guardian, retroactively receive the right over double portion of payment. Amar Rav Papa, shomer chinam, unpaid belly. Kevan she'amar pashati, the moment he said, I was negligent, meaning that he thereby rendering himself liable to compensate the owner. So then the owner transfers rights to the double payment to him. Makne lei kfeila, he gets retroactively double portion. Rashi explained, makne meaning nikne, he retroactively received that. Chalot kinyan. De'i ba'ei patar nafshe bigneiva, if he wishes, meaning the shomer chinam, the unpaid guardian, wish, he can basically exempt himself of liability by the claim of the theft. He says, it's just happened without my responsibility, and therefore he's exempt from that stolen item. So since the Ritva explained that he have that capability, that possibility to be out of that any responsibility, the one who deposited retroactively agreed to give him the double because he's sure that he gets the principal. Now, shomer sachar, but likewise, in a sense, if you have a case of paid guardian, once he states, Kevan shamar nigneva, if he said that that deposit was stolen from me, makne lei kfeila, retroactively he transferred the double of payment. Because if he wishes, he can exempt himself from the liability with the claim that the animal was somehow damaged, broken, or died, because it was such a situation and circumstances totally beyond his control, versus shoel, however, a borrower receive an item from its owner with authorization to use it without paying a fee. So because the borrower enjoyed the full benefit of the use of the item, the Torah renders him liable for the loss of the item in almost all circumstances. Okay, so he must compensate the owner for its loss, stolen or destroyed, even if it was a result of circumstances beyond his control. So, shoel she'amar hareini meshalem, a borrower say, I hereby choose to pay, the owner to do the transfer of right to the double payment to him. So here you have a strong statement of the borrower that he chooses to pay that money, and the reason is b'mai hava lei lemiftar nafshei, with what claim will the borrower be able to exempt himself from payment? So the Rif and the Rosh explain, because the one who deposit by him agreed in advance to granted him the kefel, the double payment, in order to confess or the truth and receive the basic interest. So it means only bemeta mechamat melacha. It's only with the claim that the animal died to the ordinary labor, meaning that he regular walk with her and it happens. You remember the case of borrowing chair from neighbors? So one had a little simcha in his house or apartments and he borrowed chairs from his neighbor. And all of a sudden one of the chairs was broken. So the question is that considering meta mechamat melacha? It's due to an ordinary order. Meta mechamat melacha lo shchiach. A case of a situation that animal passed away because the ordinary labor is so far and uncommon, and therefore it's accepted only with corroborating proof. So Rashash asks, he can play around, he can say, Laviti, Echzarti, borrow, return, can be untruthful. So he said, let's examine when usually persons lie with something that he figured out they'll never discover the truth. In a situation like that is the highest chance for someone to be untruthful. The question is that applicable here? The Rashash have a chakira on this, but anyway, Ika de Amri, there is those who said, Amar Rav Papa, Shoel Name, in the case of borrower, once he stated, Kevan Shamar Hareini Meshalem, I hereby choose to pay, Makne Leik Feila, the owner transfers the right to double payment to him. The Ibai Patar Nafshe Bemeta Mechamat Lemelacha. If a borrower wishes, he can exempt himself from the liability with the claim that the animal died due to the ordinary labor. So it's ordinary labor, therefore he have this double payment retroactively received, because if he wish, he can exempt himself from that responsibility by claiming that it was an ordinary walk for the animal to die. There is a view that disputed that. Amar le Rav Zvid responded to Rav Papa and he said, Hachrei Amar Abaye. He says, that's exactly what Abaye said. Shoel ad she'yishalem. A borrower requires the right to the double payment only when he actually pay for the item. Mai ta'ama, the reason for that, ho'il v'chol hana'ah shelo b'dibura lo makne le'kfeila. He says, since the entire the benefit it's for him. Why? Because he does his work and he enjoys the use of the item without payment. So therefore, the owner does not transfer the right to the double payment to the borrower because of his statement that he chooses to pay. Proof to that, Tanya Kvatei de Rav Zvi, Hashoel para mechavero ve'nigneva. If someone borrows let's say a cow from his fellow, and it was stolen, ve'kidem hashoel ve'shilem, and the borrower went ahead and he paid the keren, the principal, ve'achar כך נמצא הגנב. And all of a sudden later on it turns out that it was stolen and the thief pay double, משלם תשלומי כפל לשואל. So now the borrower received the money from the thief, which is double portion, which means that the borrower retroactively received the double payment, but that applies when he paid the principal, physically pay it in advance. So the question is that a contradiction between the Braita? Lelishna Kamma de Rav Papa, according to the first statement of Rav Papa, which is saying that the owner transferred the rights to the double payment to the borrower only if he actually paid the owner. So that Vaidai lo havya tiyuvta certainly is not a conclusive refutation of the opinion of Rav Papa. The Lishna Batra Leima Teheve Tiyuvte. However, according to the later version of Rav Papa's statement that the owner transfers right to the double payment to the borrower, even if the borrower merely says that he chooses to pay, shall we say that the Braita will be a conclusive refutation of the opinion of Rav Papa? So the Gemara answers, Omar Lach Rav Papa. Rav Papa responded to you and said, Mi alima mimatnitin. You mean to say that the Braita is much stronger than the meaning of the Mishnah? De katane, because we learned in the Braita, Shilem, the Beli, the guardian, paid the principal, and therefore he received retroactively the double payment. Ve'ukimna be'amal, and we understand that the meaning when he stated that he is paying, even though he did not physically transfer the money. Hachinami be'amar. Also here in the Braita we explain that the borrower, by uttering the word Hareini meshalem, I am willing to pay, even though he is not physically transferred the fund. The Gemara rejected that and said that's not the way to explain the Braita. Midamei. You cannot juxtapose, you cannot compare the language of the Braita to the Mishnah. Why? There is a difference between them. Hatam, over there in the Mishnah, lo katanei kidem. We not say that the guardian, the Beli, came and paid. We only said paid. Paid, meaning he said, he makes some statement that he will pay. Versus in the Braita, Hacha Katane Kidem, we said that it was physical action of pulling out fund and transferring them, not just saying it. My Kidem, what exactly the idea of saying that the meaning of went ahead, Kidem ve'amar, meaning that he went ahead and stated his intent to pay, although he did not yet actually pay. So the Gemara rejected that and said, Ha midiktane gabei socher ve'amar. However, because the fact that what we learn that the statement that the renter said that he will pay, מדיקתן לגבי סוחר ואמר וגבי שואל קידם, because we talk about the scenario when earlier the brothers speak about the ruling of Rabbi Yochanan, that the one who's renting said that he acquire retroactively double portion if he said I'm paying, and when it's come to borrower וגבי שואל קידם, versus when it's come to a borrower we use the word went ahead. So therefore, Shma Mina Davka Tani. So we zoom in and understand specifically that he actually paid. So, meaning the borrower received retroactively the double portion of payment if he physically went ahead and paid. So the Gemara have a little issue with that, and it's like rejecting that and saying, Midei Gabei Hadadei Tanya. These two brightot taught together, so we can come to that conclusion based on the discrepancy of the formulation. You may say that those brightot are basically unrelated, and it's just a different statement. Shailinu letanai devera b'chia v'debra b'yoshloya. So those yeshiva students that learned those brightot went ahead to the giant sages and asked in those yeshiva academy of Rabbi Chia and Rabbi Oshaya. So just remember, based on Rashi and others, that it was a great erudition, but was transferred orally of the brightot. Ve'amrei gabei hadadei tanyan, and they said that those brightot were taught together as one long brighta, and therefore one can draw a conclusion based on the discrepancy in their formulation. So there is a beautiful halachic book called Mishpetei Shlomo, and here the discussion what you're doing with famous Yad Ramah. The Yad Ramah said that if someone socher be'ema, if someone borrow, for our discussion in the Bible and the Talmud is an animal, can be other things, and all of a sudden nishdeda, someone came and take it. So we learned that socher in that scenario, patur me'on sin, he's exempt if it was behind his control. And the Yad Ramah said that that's under the category of what? It's a well-known Yad Ramah that said it's meta mechamat melacha, that it's dying in an ordinary reason. So, unfortunately, it was a case that they asked me to be part of the Bet Din in Israel years back. The question was, one fellow, Reuven, he borrowed a car from Shimon, and he drove to, which they call it behind the green line, he drove to one of those settlements. And while he's driving the car close to one of those refugee camps, unfortunately, it was a lot of Molotov bottles and stones were thrown to the car. What do you do? Since he told, Reuven said to Shimon, I'm going to so-and-so settlement, do you treat it as meta mechamat melacha, that the car was driving okay, he filled up the gasoline, he did everything right, it was beyond his control, it was an ordinary drive that somebody throws stones, how you treat it? It's like, in that sense, one of the Dayanim argued and said, go to the very basic. Reuven went ahead and borrowed a pen, expensive pen from Shimon. Let's say a scribe pen, or a pen that you use for the high documentations. And all of a sudden, something happened. It was a used pen. It's fall on the ground and broke. So do you treat it as a meta mechamat melacha, that it's like an ordinary work, just something happened, or not? Can be not even, he just borrowed the pen and the pen was good and functional, and all of a sudden he was about to write something and a second later it's broken. So now the Gemara offers several options of shomer shelo ratza leishava, a guardian that kind of zigzagging changes mind. It pshita, it's obvious. Amar eni meshalem, v'chazar v'amar eni meshalem. You have a situation here that the guardian said, I'm not paying, and all of a sudden he changed his mind and decided that he's paying it. Haka amar eni meshalem, since eventually he made a statement that I'm paying. So guess what? he deserved now the double portion of payment. The two in Choshen Mishpat 295, you see also in the Rambam, Hilchot Shelah Pikadon chapter 8, they both say that final halacha is like that. So even at the beginning he said, I'm not paying. But then he changed his money paying. As long as it happens in a sense of before the eventual part, which is the thief come out and pay double, he received that payment even if it was a change of othering statement. Versus Ela Amar Hareini Meshalem. But if he initially said, I hereby choose to pay, page 34b, Vechazar ve'amar eini meshalem, and then he said, I will not pay, and all of a sudden the thief was discovered. So now the barely the guardian, is he received the double portion or not? Mi amrinan, do we say that what? Meheder kahadarbe, that he is retracting his intention to pay and therefore has no right to the double payment. And it's important how Ramban, Rabbeinu Tam hold that he can retrieve his word. And there's a discussion how exactly he can do it, but or Dilma or the other way, Bemiltei Ka'ei, that he still stand on his initial statement, V'dachuyei hu de kamatchele, is just postponing the payment to a later day. That's usual method, attorneys like to use that method, that if we don't have a resolution, they keep postponing the case. So here, you figure out in a later case, he maintain rights to the double portion. Rabbeinu Tam in the Tosfot said, Kol od shelo nishba, as long as he's not making an oath, Yachol achzor bo, he can retrieve it. The second dilemma, Amar hareini meshalem umet, v'amru banav en lanu meshalmim. The person said, I hereby choose to pay, and he passed away before he paid, and his heir, his children said, we're not paying, and all of a sudden they discovered the thief. We said that, okay, since they backed out, it's over. The Shach and Choshen Mishpat 295 explained that. How far is their commitment to pay the debt of their father? Or they stand behind the statement of their father, but they just merely postponing the payment for the later day when they will be able to pay. And that's a famous Maharik. He discussed when you have Yerusha, so it's easy for children to say, oh, we inherited something, but sometimes they are debt. They are chovot, they are money that the deceased owe. How far you impose based on this sugya. Third predicament, third quandary, shilmu banim, if the children of the bailey, of the guardian, paid the principal, ma'aymatze amar lehu ki aknai kfel alav ron da'avad linach nafshaye, ledidchu lo, your father makes me a great joy, for all kind of reasons. So that's the reason why I was willing and ready to give in advance rights for the double payment to your father. But you, it's a different story. Rashi explained, if the father died after the animal was stolen, so there is a retroactive act of transaction prior to the, it's like from the time that he accepts the guardian upon himself, and therefore the father was at that time alive, and you can say that he acquired the right over that animal. But the question is how far you go, or dilmaloshna. Another dilemma, predicament, quandary, right? Shilem lebani mai, matzu amre lekiakdela avun akfela David lenach nafshe, אבל ענן לדן לו, או dilmaloshna. You see here many question, there is a difference between Rashi and the Ravid here. Rashi explained that this is in the case when the cow was stolen after the father died. The Ravid hold that it's referred to a case that the cow was stolen and then the father died. It's a question what exactly transpired here, but anyway, שילמו בנים לבנים מאי, שילם מחצה מאי, שאל שתי פרות ושילם אחת מאי, שאל מהשותפים ושילם לאחד מהם מאי, he borrowed from the partners and he paid to one of them. So he paid one of the partners his portion in the very principle, so mai, so one, basically the borrower acquired his part of the right, שותפים ששאלו ושילם אחד מהם מאי, the last two quandaries, שאל מן האישה ושילם לבעלה מאי. We learned several times the difference between נכסי צאן ברזל and נכסי מילוג, properties that the wife bring in prior to her marriage and she deserved the right for the principal forever, versus נכסי מילוג, that as long as she's married the husband has the right to the produce that come out of her estate, but not the estate itself. So therefore Rashi explained that she is considering the owner of that estate. So he borrowed from the wife and he paid to her husband. שאל מן האישה ושילם לבעלה מאי. So basically he derived the right over the double portion retroactively or not. אישה ששאלה ושילם בעלה מאי, or vice versa. You said here the wife that borrowed an item and the husband paid. What's the halacha? How you treat it? So we go by the Rashi. Right? There is a Rivan and Tosfot that goes differently, but anyway, they solve it by saying Teiku. Tishbi et haretz kushiyot ve'abayot. So the Rif and the Rambam said that they divided because it's mamona mutar besafek, because it's money that it stay with unsolved issue. It's not clear. The Rosh said that one who deposit gets that because it's the Safek, but the Beit Yitzchak once wrote a teshuva on the question between two unscrupulous partners that have a business. Let's say Reuven and Shimon have a business, and Reuven, without Shimon knowledge, did all kind of tricks with the dealing with governments things, and he gained great income from that. Shimon took him to the Beit Din, and he says that part of that money, half of that money belongs to him. Reuven said, it is true that it was joint account for joint business, but I did something in part was not really legal, and if I was get caught, I'll go to jail and the business was kaput. So therefore, since I gained all of that and no one caught me, so it's totally mine. Shimon said, but it's still the money that you invested in, it's come from the partnership. So the question is, who is right here? It's a famous teshuva of Beit Yitzchak based on that. But you see also in the many achronim, Chatam Sofer, Chavot Yair, Shvut Yaakov, and many others that dealing with situation like this, like two people who stole something, if each and every one of them is responsible for everything, or each of them responsible for a half of the payment. So depends how you go by the Ramban here, that each party will say, I need to pay half of the kefil, half of the double, or not. But as we said, you see a lot of contemporary that deal with that. Chavot Yair have a lot of writing, Shvut Yaakov and Chatam Sofer, many discuss this, but the Gemara itself, for all this fekot, they left it with the teiko.